So, here we are. This will be the first real glimpse. Not because we might discover Max has got his mojo back or the McLaren drivers may continue to rebel against their own team, but also there have been some rumblings going on further down the field which may be quite, foreboding. Because it's looking increasingly obvious that Jack Doohan's time in Formula 1 might be about to end. Not through the simple case of what we all thought, that Flavio Briatore would just then suddenly go, Jack is like, want to find a gate to get Franco in the cars. No, it might have been something of his own doing, playing that pro-gamer move in Suzuka during free practice too. Let's be real, the crash he had there, that was probably the biggest nail in his coffin. Whilst I appreciate his Aussie grit being on full display, the truth is that you just simply cannot go into turn 1 at Suzuka with the DRS still open. You just can't. I have seen multiple videos over the last few days of people attempting to do the same move, leaving the DRS open in various games with even the best Formula 1 cars out there, and they still crash in the exact same way. It's just not possible. Either this was completely reckless on Jack's part, or, this is also quite logical, a huge issue or miscorrelation in the Alpine simulator. But given the team's antics at the moment, and people wondering whether or not they'll even be called Alpine next year or what their true intentions are, especially Franco knocking around, the case of the computer system being a little bit janky in comparison to real life, that's not impossible. But either way, either scenario is not exactly glowing, especially after their own internal investigation decided, where have we heard that before, that the matter was all in Jack's hands, which seemingly took a bruising as he seemingly kept his hands on the steering wheel as he made contact, and come the end of the Japanese Grand Prix itself, he needed external assistance to get out of the car, including from his old colleague Esteban. So the question is this: did Jack injure himself in a manner which he tried to keep under wraps, be very discreet about, because he may know that at the slightest hint of his driving being compromised, be it through just a lack of ability, pressure, or indeed a physical injury to one of your hands, which are kind of important for driving, a la as we saw with Daniel Ricciardo around Zandvoort 2023, then that might be the excuse that Alpine needs to just go, right, you're out of the car, Franco, get in here! And that would be incredibly sad. He knows, Jack, that he's living on borrowed time. He needs to up his game, and trying to find an opportunity to just have that little bit more DRS was crucial to try and get out of Q1. I get why he tried it, but simply put, he either just simply didn't have the physics behind him, or his computer lied to him. And sure enough, most likely coincidentally, I hope coincidentally, Colapinto was doing a private test around Monza for Alpine that same weekend. Was this planned way ahead of time or accelerated because of what happened on Friday? Oh, and don't get me started on the whole Ryo Hirakawa stuff. Because as you may be aware, he now no longer works for Alpine, even though he was lauded just about maybe 6 weeks ago as an Alpine reserve. Even though Alpine High-Tech, Oliver Oaks, they have a connection to Toyota Gazoo in F2 and F3. But the point is, though, is that it just makes this out that they just wanted a Japanese driver in FP1 for a publicity stunt to try and win some fans over. But, simply put, I don't think you need to worry about that in Japan, Flavio, because many people will remember Team Enstone from the classic Benetton days. So you're fine in that regard. You don't need to do something so surface level and disingenuous. But hey, for real, I'm glad he got to showcase himself, and actually turned out to be better than Gasly in FP1. Who would have thought? He's actually pretty good in that car. And then, of course, there's the obvious thing of that took away a free practice session for Jack. So all eyes will be on him in Bahrain to see how he handles it, because we all remember the injuries that Lance Stroll had and him pushing himself to try and be at the Bahrain Grand Prix 2 years ago. Could Jack be in a real world of pain at the moment, and is he going to try and hide it? Use that Aussie grit and survive? Well, I could easily talk about this for a good long video, so I'll stop it here just to save myself and you. But if you'd like to hear more in a future video, put an X-ray emoji down in the comments. Just one, that's all you need to do. That means I know. Because then I've got to tell you about what Honda's been doing at the moment. They've been feeling a little bit frisky after their win in Japan. After the understandable euphoria of capping off a clean sweep of victories at that track since returning there after the Roni Rona in 2022, then there was the wholesome and fairy tale poetic act of Max Verstappen donating his race-winning helmet to Honda, and the assurances that the champion would want to work with them in the future in whatever capacity befalls them. And considering that Aston Martin has a contract with Max to supply GT3 cars for his own racing team, all of these different puzzle pieces have now been collected together and are starting to form some kind of a pattern. And no wonder Fernando Alonso was grinning like a Cheshire cat when he was asked about Max. Does he know something that we don't? Either Max might be his teammate next year, or if he has to step back and Max takes his seat, he can at least work together with Verstappen in some sort of a capacity, which is a good thing or a nice thing or whatever. But some changes may be happening, because Honda has resumed that they may begin to assert regarding driver lineups some sort of say in the matter. And it's gotten a lot of attention, but what could this mean? Now, if you're thinking, well, it's easy, Law. Surely this means that Honda will do their best to try and convince Aston Martin and Papa Stroll to sign on Yuki Tsunoda for that team for 2026 alongside Fernando, right? Or Lance? Well, I don't think so. He is free to choose his destiny however he wants to, with Honda providing financial backing. So they are quite happy if Yuki ultimately decides to remain with Red Bull after Honda depart and head over to Aston Martin. So it's up to Yuki really, whatever he chooses to do with the next stage of his career. Honda will not influence it. But when it comes to them working with Papa Stroll's team, they might now start to voice their opinions about certain things. So I do doubt we're going to be seeing Honda immediately just going, hey, get Lance out of that car now! No. If they felt that way, Koji Watanabe would find a more delicate way of asserting their feelings. They would voice their concerns calmly, subtly. Doesn't mean necessarily that Papa Stroll has to listen to it, but they'll just make their feelings clear. They've also said they are looking forward to working with Adrian Newey again. It's just all coalescing into some really fascinating quotes, especially them actually deciding that, oh, we do want to have some sort of say or input or some kind of opinion being heard regarding driver lineups. Because I remember when they announced that deal originally, Honda then immediately said, oh, no, we're not going to influence the roster whatsoever. No, we'll leave that to Aston Martin. We're just going to supply power units. Well, that's immediately changed again when they realised that, hey, we're ending a really good thing and we're entering with a team that's really not that great at the moment. It's kind of mediocre. So maybe Honda might have more say or sway to be able to, push back a bit. Unlike with Red Bull, who already have Max Verstappen, they're a solid front-running team, whereas Aston Martin aren't yet. They'll feel a bit more compulsion to be able to, puff out their chests and say, that's a quite interesting situation. So yeah, this U-turn from Honda, very intriguing and maybe a developing story. And if you'd like to hear me talk about that in a specific video, put a moped emoji in the comments, just one, to recognise the iconic Honda Cub. But okay, Bahrain. It's slowly becoming the Circuit de Catalunya of the Middle East. In fact, you can argue that it's already become it. Teams and drivers know it inside and out, and the junior drivers, they've already got a good handle on it too. Then it means that the variety between the new drivers and the older drivers, it's far less pronounced than it would be at a typical circuit where there is a huge disparity, which is exactly what we saw in testing with Kimi Antonelli. But we will come back to him later on. Wait, Law, are you seriously buying into the delusion? You seriously think that Kimi has a chance of finishing in the top 5? Really, Law? Really? Really? Well, cool your jets, my friend. I will explain later. Or you can just skip forward and find out exactly immediately. I'm not your mum. And I'm not saying that what we saw in pre-season testing will happen the exact same way. We will have had some upgrades being brought to some cars, and there's also the jeopardy and uncertainty of, because we went testing there, we may see teams bringing updates to try and compare and contrast with the findings they already have. So there is that element there we will find out on Friday with the show and tell documents. But it really depends on the balancing act that all the teams have. Do they just put all of their upgrades right out there in the open right now, or do they stagger them over the course of the season, just little and often instead of just big and infrequent, and then decide whether or not to commit to this year still or next year? So that's going to be a really tricky situation, especially for the lower half of the teams, where 9th and 10th, if Yuki can get his act together, will be pretty much the best they can do, save DNFs. But speaking of Red Bull and Yuki, they have turned a corner, and the momentum displayed at Suzuka can carry forward here and thereafter for sure. And Verstappen's comments make for interesting reading, that whilst the RB21 has shown signs of steadying its own ship, there are still some issues, in his honest opinions, that need addressing. Which in this case is the manner of working from home. Now, I mean, I'm not one to talk since, well, I work from my home right here, up on this ladder. But in the case of Max Verstappen, he considers the idea of working from home in a high-pressure environment, running a Formula 1 operation, where you really have to collaborate, get yourself stuck into the car, so that means you can find a particular thing and then go, aha! instead of just being on a screen about 50 miles away or so, he would consider that a situation where you can find yourself winding up being a little bit lazy. Now, just be clear, he is not trying to be offensive. He is just saying in the context of trying to figure out the RB21, having more hands on deck in the factory where you can collaborate face to face is more effective and could easily expedite the discovery of something that may turn the RB20 around a bit more permanently, really compound on what they found in Suzuka. Now they've got a second driver who's not fighting for their lives anymore. Double the input, double the fun. Because this momentum does need to continue for Red Bull to be able to just pull away from all of the criticism and hate and rage they've been sustaining the last couple of weeks. They need more and more opportunities to fight back against Zach Brown and make him suffer in terms of the press and little needles after all the stuff he did with Christian Horner and the entire team. You might be thinking, well, why would I want that? I'm a McLaren fan. No, I want McLaren to just be a little bit proactive, you know? Max and GP, what they said on the radio, I didn't like hearing that, but they were right to. So when it does come to Yuki, I do see him having a far better time of it around Bahrain, a track where he famously scored on debut. And now he's covered over 100 laps in the RB21 in race conditions, as well as providing valuable intel of his own, which then led to a setup which was a little bit easier to handle on the first bounce. He's already said that he's gained the confidence necessary to be able to kick on with his journey with the senior team after years of being the bridesmaid, in the words of Christian Horner. Unlike the situation with Liam Lawson, whereas it turns out that, Christian Horner didn't do this out of a duty of care, believing that Liam's confidence was dented. No, according to Lawson, his self-confidence was not dented at all. It just simply happened, the move. He refutes the claims from the team boss of Red Bull Racing, and him saying that the decision was made up for him. He had no say in it. He just got a call saying it was happening, and that was it. His own self-confidence? Overruled. But anyway, back to Yuki. He believes he will do better around here, but that he would have to nail it in qualifying to fully realise that potential and optimism, which I think is absolutely accurate. That you really need to try and hustle on Saturday, and that's exactly what Yuki needed to do, because he admitted that that mistake, especially coming out of Sector 1, yeah, that pretty much undid any chance of getting into Q3. So we need a faultless race from Yuki to be able to score some points, which I think is entirely possible. I mean, the bottom half, quite honestly. But hey, if he can do that in his second race, that's not too shabby. Good progress on a baseline track. But who knows, maybe if he can kick on, he might be able to do Red Bull a little bit of a favour and nip at the heels of the Ferraris. Because their lot makes for sobering reading for the existing Tifosi and the new intake from Team LH. Leclerc claiming that in its present state, the car has not much more to give, and Hamilton then claiming of power unit issues which have impacted his car specifically, leading to an anonymous weekend in Japan. But then, to be fair, he made the only overtake in the top 10, so make what you will of these particular sentiments. But needless to say, the overall picture is a really negative one around Maranello. The experiment, the gamble to change 99% of the SF24, in Vassar's own words, were not ideal. Was this a gamble necessary considering we've got a regulation change next year? Did they really need to change all of this so fast, so soon, with only 1 year to go? If this trend keeps continuing, several questions are going to need to be addressed amongst many different circles. I'll leave it at that. You can get your own foam out about that. What's going on? As for other points prospects, it would be wrong of me to dismiss Williams from at least one of their cars getting into the top 10, if testing was anything to go by, where they absolutely flew. They just looked so planted and on it. And if it turns out not to be the case, that all the stuff we saw in pre-season testing was smoke and mirrors and ultimately glory runs, then that would be incredibly disappointing from a team that has constantly been championing the idea of honesty, pragmatism, putting everything on display, and just being blunt with people about the situation with the team. If we realise that James Vowles, all of that stuff in testing, was just completely false, shame. Damn shame. But hope springs eternal, and my hope is that we could see Alex Albon score for a fourth consecutive weekend. In the here and now, Alex is absolutely fired up, and this is fantastic after last year, where his integrity and position as a driver was thrown into question. And then with Carlos, considering how good he was around Bahrain and testing, you would like to think that he could at least secure a singular point, 10th maybe. So if they do the deed and get maybe, say, like a P8 and a P10 or something like that, 5 extra points to their name, and Haas finding themselves out in the cold, and then Alpine and Aston Martin nowhere because they've been a little bit hit and miss, that's more points. That's pulling away from their nearest rivals, Haas, because They're a dark horse and enigma. Nobody knows how they're going to do in the race because they were just doing their own thing in testing, miles behind everyone else with far lower top speeds. That's going to be interesting in of itself. But right now, Williams look good to just constantly build up the points, rack them up. So that means they can then relax a little bit, breathe more easily in the second half of the season. That's looking really good, especially when it comes time for the teams to try and decide whether or not to switch for 2026. But let's switch things up right now as I give you my top 5 predictions for the 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix. Now, even though some cracks are starting to display themselves in the facade that is McLaren and the MCL39 and the 2025 outfit, I still believe that based on the pre-season testing data that we have found, as well as the judgment calls from the flexi-wing modifications from China and Japan, Lando and Norris will still have just about enough to finish ahead of everyone else and win this Grand Prix. Because admittedly, he has had the strongest start to a season yet, albeit with some little wobbles, he's been able to power through them. And that sheer composure during testing, in some cases in long runs being 30 seconds ahead of George Russell and everyone else, yeah, I don't expect to see these numbers during this particular Grand Prix weekend, but certainly it is going to be somewhat comfortable. Comfortable enough for Lando to be able to dictate the pace and therefore have enough in the tank and potential in the car to be able to yield something in the top half of the podium or maybe on the top step. And most importantly, he's in a good place right now, mentally speaking, because he's still ahead of Max Verstappen in the championship. However, Norris has slowly begun to exhibit frustration and a little bit of uneasiness regarding the MCL39, that he really has to push it to the limit to try and get the most out of it, which he is able to do, and he is far more able to just go for it. That killer instinct that was lacking somewhat last year, it is showing itself, albeit a little bit more bombastically than his teammate. But at this time, he does have that little bit of edge in qualifying, albeit it's getting smaller and smaller, to make the difference, which is crucial in this particular phase of the regulations, where dirty air reigns supreme, unfortunately, tarnishing the name that is Suzuka, a fantastic track, but these regulations have made it a laughingstock. People calling it the Monaco of Asia. What the hell? The internal machinations of the McLaren strategy of team first, they are going to be thrown under immense scrutiny. If Max Verstappen can get between them, which I do suspect will happen in the later runnings of this top 5, this might make Lando breathe a little more easily. But if he doesn't, and if it turns out being a front row or Oscars ahead, then if the team first mentality stands, then it's up to Lando to get past Oscar, and whether or not he's able to, that'll be a bit of a wild card. But maybe not quite as much of an edge he had during testing thanks to that rear wing being a little bit more stiff. And when it comes to second place, it's not going to be Oscar Piastri, but based on what we've seen, it's going to be Max Verstappen, because as we have seen, this car, the RB21, has still got a long way to go to get to the ideal machine Max needs to mount a decent championship campaign over the entire year. But they are onto something, and Max is pumped. He is fired up in a way which is far more measured, conventional, and more racing driver than just what people have seen over the years when Max was a little less mature. This is a really calm and collected, but also emotional and passionate Verstappen, which is fascinating to see. He has showcased adaptability as well as his legendary skill, and he didn't need any rain to try and sugarcoat it. This was all absolutely, he got in front, he dictated the pace, and thanks to all of the weaknesses and failings of the other teams, he was able to rule the roost. And that is exactly what you need to be a multiple world champion. As for those tweaks in Japan, they did work. It provided some good results. Yuki was able to do his own thing. Max didn't have to worry about what people would think of Liam. That wasn't a distraction. The team was actually compliant and more flexible and willing about setup, so that was not a distraction. More and more fires are being put out in the operational facility of the Red Bull garage, which is absolutely great for Max focusing on the race. And if this continues, where it's a little bit more versatile set up, Max will have more time to dial it in, remain within the front 2 rows, and maybe have more and more goes at trying to win the race. Second place, though, I think is perfectly reasonable. It'll be a massive improvement for where he was in testing, when no one was quite sure where Red Bull were. Testing front wings all the time, really trying to find a solution and not quite being there. If they got a concrete battle plan for Bahrain, and they can maximise on their really good history in the last couple of years of absolutely dominating, second place, within maybe 5 to 10 seconds of Lando, Yeah, perfectly reasonable. The top 3 will be the McLarens and Max and Oscar Piastri in 3rd place. But if he can get ahead and he can nail qualifying and he can dictate the pace of the race, much like Max, then he can be a force to contend with. But unfortunately, the situation at McLaren is a bit of a limiting factor, and Oscar knows it. He needs to do the business in qualifying and outdo his teammate to allow the team to just get out of the way. He can exploit their paralysis through fear about dictating what the drivers do and try and outdo his teammate, the more established team leader. Because like with Lando, he had a good gap between the Mercedes in testing, so he'd be able to maximize and milk this as well. But at the same time, it really does depend on Saturday. Oscar has still got that little bit more to outdo the likes of Norris, but now it's down from like 3 or 4 tenths consistently down to less than a tenth. Suzuka, it was within 300ths. Close, but no cigar. It needs that little bit more. He is about maybe 90% there, so a 3rd place in Bahrain. This would be, I think, his best ever finish around this circuit, considering the first time at his debut, he didn't even finish it. So that would be a little win in of itself, but it's all to do with what the team machinations do and how he's able to position himself, and if he is able to make the use of the wider circuit, find some opportunities, and then, Robert's very much your mother's brother. It might mean that the team will just go, well, you can race, but neither are we going to give you the offer to let you through, so you got to do it yourself. Maybe this might be a scenario where Oscar's be able to nod and just go, yeah, okay. Because I'm pretty sure that both of them will get sick and tired of this eventually. Because they'll be made to look like a laughingstock, their integrity questioned. It's not a good look. But what may be a good look is George Russell in P4. But wait a minute, Law. Mercedes were looking really good around Bahrain. They were fastest on the final day of testing. George turning out to be an absolute madman, absolutely just dominating when no one expected them to do well. Well, yeah, that is absolutely true. They have been a bit of a surprise this season. If Mercedes just were relying on his numbers, not Kimi's, he would be finishing ahead of Ferrari in the constructors by himself. I mean, Max, that's a given, but George? George! I know you're going to throw the disqualification card at me, but points mean prizes at the end of the day. It's what affected Mercedes and Ferrari around Austin 2023. It's exactly what affected Ferrari in China. But it's that consistency which is key in this championship where everything's so tight. George needs to just pump in more top 5 finishes. Even if it's not a podium, he's still been able to accrue 2 of them, and one of only 4 drivers to have actually stepped atop the dais in a Grand Prix. And given how consistent and stable they were during testing, and then relying immensely on the C3 tyres, which will be the softest tyre during this Grand Prix, they brought 28 sets, I believe, whereas others brought like maybe closer to 20, so they had a lot more data. This could really provide a little bit of a enigma amongst the race conditions itself, especially since it's going to be quite stable, like the mid-20s or something at nighttime. This will be a very interesting situation where I think George Russell may be a lot closer to the top 3 than you might think, and that means it could then bring Mercedes some more points, more opportunities, and pulling away from Ferrari. And at this time, they would ideally want Mercedes to finish in the top 3 in the constructors, get back there at least, not be 4th. And doing it in front of Ferrari, Toto will be a very happy pumpernickel. George, I think he will capitalise on it with another solid top 4 finish. And, yep, I'm going to go there. Kimi Antonelli in 5th place. Oh, look at you, Law, being a little bit bold and frisky, are we? Not putting Charles Leclerc in the top 5, and therefore we got different people for once? Oh, bravo, Law. Yeah, okay, I get it. I was being safe, but somewhat logical. My point was proven around Japan. Those same 5 men were in the top 5, just in a slightly different order. But in this case, I'm quite happy to take a punt on Kimi. And why? You only got to look to the pre-season test. And yes, I've said, different teams can bring different parts which may change the pecking order a little bit. But Kimi Antonelli has proven already that he is quite capable of taking it to the big guys and holding his own. And then you've only got to look at the data that we got from the pre-season test. When he was doing his sessions, he was just getting on with it. He wasn't setting the timesheets on fire or anything, but he was just in the mix, getting on with the job, like he'd been there for a couple of years already. And already that's proving dividends for him being in the top 5 still in the championship, which is wild. He could easily beat the record of Lewis Hamilton, easily Oscar Piastri, of scoring the most championship points in a debut season. That would be huge for Toto's ego. seriously, because Max didn't do that. Therefore, I think all of this confidence will really help out the Italian Stappen, because this is just all proving to come together. He was pumped around Suzuka, a track he'd never been to before. He was meant to be, but then that got postponed, but he was able to do it anyway. Rain didn't have to flatter him, much like with Max around Suzuka when he won the thing. And Bahrain, it's a track that he knows. He just oozes this endearing factor about him. Like, he's just happy to be here, and we're happy to see him happy to be there. You just look at him and you just go, I can't be mad at you. So I do expect that we will see a good race from this kid. It depends on how close he is to George. I don't know in that regard. But maybe, given how Mercedes were quite solid in preseason testing, whereas Ferrari were complaining about elements of understeer for both drivers, they weren't really on it, whereas Mercedes were quite solid, they might have the edge here, regardless of what parts are brought. But again, it really does depend on whether or not teams decide to use Bahrain as a good benchmark to compare where they were in testing to where they are now. But either way, good times at Mercedes. Something which McLaren can do with right now good times, as they fend off criticism from the outside world about artificially stifling the drivers. Both of them. To find out why I think this model cannot go on for the entire season, that both drivers will be done an injustice, watch this video next, straight after this one.